When Michael Jordan walked into the upscale steakhouse in the heart of Chicago, he moved with a quiet confidence that turned heads without needing to draw attention to himself. He was a man who was used to being recognized, but he never sought it out tonight. Was supposed to be a quiet dinner, a moment of peace after a long week of business meetings and public appearances. He was seated at a corner table, a spot that offered a good view of the restaurant, while also providing a measure of privacy. The low lighting and the soft murmur of conversations from other diners created a relaxing atmosphere, something he rarely got to experience. He ordered his usual, a perfectly cooked steak and a glass of water, content to simply observe the world around him for a few minutes. He enjoyed these rare moments of anonymity, even if they were fleeting. He watched a young couple on a first date, their nervous laughter echoing softly across the room. He saw a group of businessmen celebrating a deal, their voices loud and boisterous. It was a snapshot of life, a world away from the high-stakes pressure of his own existence. The waitress assigned to his table was a young woman with kind eyes and a nervous energy that she tried to hide behind a professional smile. She approached his table, her hands slightly trembling as she placed a basket of warm bread before him. "Is there anything else I can get for you, sir?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled kindly, hoping to put her at ease, just enjoying the quiet. "Thank you," he replied, his voice calm and reassuring. Her nervousness seemed to ease slightly in the face of his gentle demeanor. But as she walked away, he noticed she kept glancing back at his table. It wasn't the usual starstruck gaze he was used to from fans. Instead, it was a look of deep thought, a look of internal conflict, as if she was wrestling with a difficult decision. He thought little of it at first. Perhaps she was just a big basketball fan trying to work up the courage to ask for an autograph. He had seen that look 1,000 times before. The meal was excellent and the service was perfect. The young woman, whose name tag read Sarah, was attentive without being intrusive. She refilled his water glass without a word. She cleared his plate with practiced efficiency, yet he could still feel her nervous energy, a quiet tension that seemed to fill the space around her. Every time she approached the table, he could see the struggle in her eyes, a silent debate taking place behind her professional smile. When he was finally finished with his meal, he signaled for the check. She approached the table with the small leather folder, and as she placed it in front of him, their hands brushed for a brief
moment. In that fleeting second, he felt a small piece of folded paper being pressed into his palm. It was so quick, so subtle, he might have thought he imagined it, if not for the look in her eyes. A mixture of fear and desperate hope. "Thank you," she said quickly, her voice strained before turning and walking away, without another word. She disappeared into the bustling activity near the kitchen, not looking back. Michael Jordan paused for a moment, the leather folder sitting unopened on the table, his fingers closed around the small piece of folded paper in his hand. This was different from the usual fan encounter, the secrecy, the look in her eyes. It felt heavier, more significant. What could it be? A phone number? A request for an autograph? It felt different from that. The urgency in her eyes suggested something more, something important. He casually opened his hand under the table, hiding his movement from any curious onlookers. He unfolded the small note. The paper was a torn piece of a restaurant napkin, and the writing was neat, but clearly hurried. It contained only a few short sentences, but as he read them, the entire world seemed to stop. He read the note once, then twice, the words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. He looked up, searching for the waitress Sarah, but she was gone, vanished into the organized chaos of the restaurant staff. The busy restaurant faded into a blur, the quiet murmur of conversations disappeared, and the taste of the expensive steak was gone from his mouth. All that remained were the words on the napkin, a message from a ghost of his past, a plea for help that reached across decades of fame and fortune. He sat there for a long time, the note clutched in his hand, the check forgotten on the table. His mind raced back in time to a dusty high school gym in North Carolina, to the sound of squeaking sneakers on polished wood, and a booming voice that pushed him to be better than he ever thought he could be. The man who had shaped him, the man who had given him the discipline and the heart to become a champion, was in trouble, and his daughter had just risked her job to slip him this desperate message. The note was simple and direct. It read, "Mr. Jordan, my name is Sarah Washington.
My father was your high school coach, Dean Washington. He's very sick, and we're in trouble. I'm sorry to do this, but I don't know who else to turn to. He always said you were like a son to him." Coach Dean Washington. The name echoed in his memory, a name he had not heard in years but had never forgotten. The coach was a legend, a tough, no-nonsense man who demanded perfection, but who also had a deep well of kindness for the kids he mentored. He was the man who had seen the raw talent in a young Michael Jordan and had molded it with relentless training and unwavering belief. The question wasn't whether he would help. The question was, what would he do next? And how could he possibly repay a debt so large? No one, not even the young waitress who had taken such a risk, could have possibly imagined the incredible chain of events she had just set into motion. Her simple act of courage would change everything for her family, and for the famous man who now sat stunned and silent, his world completely shaken by a few simple words on a piece of a napkin. Michael finally looked down at the check, opening the leather folder. He placed a credit card inside on the tip line. He wrote a number so large the manager would later call him to confirm it wasn't a mistake. On the bottom of the receipt, he wrote a short message of his own. "Sarah, please wait for me by the back exit after your shift. I need to talk to you." He needed to know everything. He needed to understand the full story behind the desperate words she had written. The night was no longer about a quiet dinner. It was now about a promise made long ago, a promise to never forget the people who helped him on his journey to the top. The cool night air of the alley was a sharp contrast to the warm, bustling restaurant. Sarah Washington waited nervously by the dumpsters. Her shift had ended an hour ago, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. What if he didn't come? What if he had been angry about the note? Maybe she had made a terrible mistake, risking her job for a crazy hope. She replayed the moment in her mind 100 times, the way her hand trembled as she passed him the note, the look of surprise on his face. She was sure she would be fired in the morning. Her manager had a strict policy against bothering celebrity guests. Every time the back door of the restaurant opened, her heart leaped. But it was just a cook taking out the trash or another server heading home, their laughter echoing in the quiet alley. She was about to give up, to accept that she had been foolish to hope, when a large black luxury car pulled into the alley, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It moved silently, a sleek shadow in the night. The back window rolled down and she saw him. Michael Jordan, motioning for her to get in. Her hands were trembling so hard she could barely open the car door. She fumbled with the handle, her mind a blank slate of fear and anticipation. "Get in," he said. His voice was gentle but serious. "We need to talk." As the car pulled away from the restaurant, leaving the noise and the smells of the alley behind, he turned to her and held up the small napkin note. "Tell me everything," he said. Simply, and so she did. Her story tumbled out in a rush of words and tears, a story she had held inside for so long. Her father, the great coach Dean Washington, the man who had been a giant in her childhood, a figure of strength and authority, was now a shadow of his former self. A terrible illness, a rare form of self, a terrible illness, a rare form of dementia had taken hold of him, stealing his strength, his memory, and his fiery spirit. The medical bills, she explained, were like a mountain. They could never hope to climb. They had sold their family home, the one where she grew up, to pay for the initial treatments. They had moved into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown part of the city. Her mother, Eleanor, a proud woman who had always worked as a substitute teacher, now worked 2 jobs, one as a cashier at a grocery store and another cleaning offices at night, just to keep them afloat. Sarah worked every night at the restaurant. Her dreams of finishing her college degree in nursing, now a distant, impossible memory. Her father, the proud man who had molded so many young lives into champions, now needed round-the-clock care, and the family was drowning under the weight of it all. "He was so proud of you," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "He followed your whole career. He has a scrapbook, a huge one, filled with every newspaper article ever written about you, from high school to the pros. When you won your first championship with the Bulls, he cried like a baby. He told everyone in the neighborhood, 'That's my boy.' He always called you his boy." Michael Jordan listened patiently. His face was unreadable in the dim light of the car, but his eyes never left hers. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He just listened, absorbing every painful detail of the story she told him about the doctors, who had run out of answers, about the insurance company that had stopped paying for the best medicine, about the nights her mother would cry quietly in the kitchen, thinking no one could hear when she finished her story. A heavy silence filled the car. The city lights of Chicago flashed by outside the window, a world of success and glamour that felt a million miles away from the quiet desperation of her family's life. "I'm sorry to bother you with this," Sarah said, finally wiping tears from her face. "I just didn't know what else to do. I saw you walk in tonight, and it felt like a sign, a last chance. I know my dad would be so angry if he knew I did this. His pride, you know, but I couldn't watch him and my mum suffer anymore." He finally spoke. His voice was low and steady. "You did the right thing, Sarah. You did exactly the right thing." He told the driver to take her home when they arrived at her small apartment building. He didn't just drop her off. He got out of the car with her. "I need to see him," he said. "Is he awake?" She nodded. Her father's illness made his sleep schedule unpredictable. Some nights he was awake all night, lost in a world of confusion. She led him up the creaky stairs to the second-floor apartment. The smell of boiled vegetables and antiseptic hung in the air, a smell of sickness and struggle. Inside the apartment was small but immaculately clean. A hospital bed was set up in the corner of the living room, taking up most of the space, and in it lay a frail old man. His eyes were open, but they seemed to look at nothing. His once powerful frame was now thin and fragile. Under a simple white sheet, a woman with tired lines etched deeply into her face sat in a chair beside the bed, holding his hand. She looked up in surprise as Sarah entered, followed by the tall, famous stranger. "Mom, this is the man I told you about," Sarah said softly. Eleanor Washington's eyes widened in disbelief. She recognized him immediately from the countless pictures her husband had treasured for so many years. Michael Jordan walked slowly to the bedside and knelt down so he was at eye level with the man in the bed. "Coach," he said, his voice gentle. "Coach, it's me, Michael." The old man's eyes flickered for a moment, a tiny spark of recognition in their cloudy depths. He tried to speak, but only a soft, unintelligible sound came out. Michael reached out and took the coach's thin, cool hand in his own. "It's okay, Coach," he said. "I'm here now. Everything is going to be all right." He stayed for nearly an hour, talking to the coach and to Eleanor, asking questions about the illness, the treatments, the financial struggles. He looked at the stacks of medical bills on the kitchen table, held together with a rubber band. He saw the worn-out furniture and the threadbare carpets, and with every passing minute, a quiet resolve hardened within him. He saw the deep love and utter exhaustion in Eleanor's eyes, the mix of hope and fear in Sarah's, and the flicker of the once great spirit trapped inside the coach's broken body. As he prepared to leave, he turned to Eleanor. "I'm going to make some calls," he said. "I'm going to get the best doctors in the world to look at him, and I want you to stop worrying about these bills." He gestured to the pile on the table. "They will all be taken care of." She started to protest, to say that it was too much, that they couldn't possibly accept. But he held up a hand. "Your husband taught me never to give up," he said. "He taught me to fight for every point, to leave everything I had on the court. Now it's my turn to fight for him." He gave Sarah his personal phone number and told her to call him with any updates, no matter the time of day or night, as he walked back to his car. A plan was already forming in his mind. It was a bold plan, a complex plan, a plan that would require all of his vast resources and all of his global influence. But as he sat in the back of the car, driving away from the small apartment through the sleeping city, he knew without a doubt that he would see it through. He owed this man more than just money. He owed him a debt of gratitude that could only be repaid by giving him back his dignity and his hope. Coach Dean Washington deserved a champion's fight, and that was exactly what he was going to get. The city of Chicago slept, but Michael Jordan was wide awake. His luxurious hotel suite, which usually felt like a sanctuary of calm, now felt like a command center, a war room for the battle that was to come. He paced back and forth on the plush carpet, his mind A whirlwind of logistics and strategy, he had spent the first hour after leaving Coach Washington's apartment on the phone with his business manager, a brilliant and unflappable woman who was used to his late-night calls, but was surprised by the raw urgency and deep emotion in his voice. "I need you to clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks," he had told her. "I don't care what it is. Cancel everything, the meetings in New York, the endorsement shoot in Los Angeles, the charity golf tournament in Florida. All of it gone." She had protested at first, mentioning multi-million-dollar deals and long-standing commitments, but he was firm. "This is not negotiable," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "This is more important than any of that." She knew from the tone of his voice that this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. His next series of calls were to the top medical experts in the country. He didn't go through assistants or schedulers. He used his personal contacts to get the direct lines of the heads of neurology at world-renowned hospitals. He woke one of them up in the middle of the night, but he didn't apologize. He explained Coach Washington's condition with a clarity and detail that surprised even himself. He had absorbed everything. Sarah and Eleanor had told him every medical term, every failed treatment, every doctor's pessimistic prognosis. He didn't just ask for a consultation, he demanded a full-scale intervention. "I want a team of your best people," he said, his voice calm but steely. "I want neurologists, geriatric specialists, and palliative care experts, and I want them assembled by tomorrow. Money is not an object. I will fly them in myself on my jet. I will pay for whatever equipment they need. I just want answers, and I want action." The doctor, accustomed to dealing with wealthy and powerful people, was taken aback by the sheer force of Michael's will. He promised to assemble a team and review the coach's medical files first thing in the morning. Michael had his assistant immediately courier the files to the doctor's home. His third call was to a trusted friend who ran a high-end private nursing and home care service, a service that catered to celebrities and executives. He described the coach's small apartment, the inadequate hospital bed in the living room, the deep exhaustion he had seen on Eleanor's face. "I need a team of the best nurses," he explained. "Not just aides, but registered nurses with experience in dementia care. 24-hour care, starting immediately at sunrise. I want them to be compassionate, skilled and discreet. The family has been through enough. I don't want them to feel like their home is being invaded, but I want my coach to have the best care humanly possible." His friend assured him a hand-picked team would be at the apartment by 6 a.m. With each call, the plan grew clearer and more ambitious. It wasn't just about paying off medical bills or hiring a few nurses. It was about creating a fortress of care and support around the coach and his family. It was about using his immense power and wealth to do what battle they could not, to fight a battle that they had been losing on their own. He paused his pacing and stood before the vast window, looking out at the glittering city lights spread out below him. He thought about Coach Washington's booming voice in the high school gym, pushing him to run one more lap, to take one more shot, until his muscles burned and his lungs felt like they would burst. He remembered the coach staying late to help him with his form, long after everyone else had gone home, showing him how to perfect his footwork, how to release the ball at the peak of his jump. He remembered the coach pulling him aside after a particularly tough loss, not to yell at him, but to tell him that failure was just a part of the journey to success, a lesson to be learned, not a reason to quit. The coach hadn't just taught him how to play basketball, he had taught him how to live. He had instilled in him the values of discipline, hard work, and a relentless refusal to ever give up. Now, as he stood looking out at the sleeping city, he felt that same fire igniting within him. This was a new kind of game, a new kind of opponent, an insidious disease that was stealing his mentor's mind. But the stakes were higher than any championship he had ever played for. This was about a man's life, a family's future, and a debt of honor that had to be paid. He spent the rest of the night on his laptop, turning his hotel suite into a research hub. He dove into medical journals and scientific papers, learning everything he could about the coach's specific condition. He read about the latest experimental treatments and clinical trials happening at research institutions around the world. His mind, which had once been dedicated to memorizing plays and studying opponents, was now sharp and focused on understanding the complexities of the human brain. He wasn't just going to fund the coach's care, he was going to understand it to be an active part of the fight. By the time the first rays of dawn began to paint the eastern sky over Lake Michigan, he had a multi-page document outlining every phase of his plan. He had codenamed it Operation Bulldog, a nod to their old high school mascot. It detailed financial arrangements, legal trusts, medical interventions, and long-term support systems for the family. It was a masterpiece of planning and compassion, a testament to the lessons the coach had taught him all those years ago about preparation and strategy. He finally sat down in an armchair as the first light of day filled the room. He hadn't slept at all, but he wasn't tired. He was energized. He felt a sense of purpose. He hadn't felt in years. The fame, the money, the trophies, they were all wonderful. But this was different. This felt real. This mattered in a way that a game never could. He picked up his phone and made one more call, this time to Sarah Washington, the young waitress who had started it all. Her voice was sleepy when she answered, but she woke up quickly when she heard his voice. "I want you to quit your job at the restaurant," he said simply. "Be bored." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the...
Line what? But I can't, my family needs the money. Your new job starts today.
He continued, "Your salary will be double what you were making at the restaurant. Your only responsibility from this moment on is to be there for your parents. You will coordinate with the doctors, the nurses, and the financial team that I am putting in place, and you will make sure your mother gets some rest." Sarah began to cry, a sound of pure disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. He listened for a moment, then spoke again, voice soft but firm. "There's no time for tears, Sarah. We have work to do. We have a battle to win." The sun was now fully up and the city was coming to life for Michael Jordan. The game had just begun. The next morning, just as Michael Jordan had promised, at precisely 6 a.m., a discreet van pulled up in front of the Washington's worn-down apartment building. From it emerged a team of 3 highly trained nurses. Their uniforms were crisp and their demeanor was calm and professional, a stark contrast to the chaos and desperation that had defined the family's life for so long. Eleanor Washington, who had been awake most of the night tossing and turning with a mixture of hope and disbelief, was stunned when she opened the door. "We're here to help," a gentle voice told her. "We're from the agency Mr. Jordan contacted. We'll take care of everything. You just focus on being a wife, not a full-time caregiver." Within an hour, the small apartment was transformed. A new hospital bed with an advanced pressure-reducing mattress was brought in to replace the old lumpy one. Monitoring equipment was set up discreetly in the corner of the living room. The nurses moved with a quiet efficiency that was both astonishing and deeply comforting.
They bathed Coach Washington, changed his linens, and administered his medication with a gentle touch that spoke of years of experience for the first time in months. Eleanor was able to sit at her small kitchen table and drink a cup of coffee without having to listen for every sound from the living room, without having to worry about her husband's next dose of medicine, or whether she could physically lift him on her own. She watched the nurses work, tears of pure relief streaming down her face. She felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying until it was gone. A little while later, another knock came at the door. This time it was a team of doctors, specialists in neurology, internal medicine and palliative care, flown in that morning on Michael Jordan's private jet. They didn't have the rushed, impersonal manner of the clinic doctors. The family was used to seeing who always seemed to be looking at the clock. They pulled up chairs and spent over 2 hours with Eleanor and Sarah, asking detailed questions and listening intently to their answers. They wanted to know everything, not just about the coach's medical history, but about his personality, his passions, his life before the illness. They examined the coach with a thoroughness that was astonishing, checking his reflexes, his cognitive responses, and his overall physical condition. They reviewed the mountain of medical files that had been sent over from Michael's office overnight. Their faces were serious but kind, betraying none of the weary pessimism the family had grown so accustomed to after their examination. The lead doctor, a woman with a kind but direct gaze, sat down with Eleanor and Sarah again. "What we believe," he said carefully, "is that your husband has been misdiagnosed. The form of dementia he has is rare, but we have seen it before, and more importantly, there may be an experimental treatment that could help. It's not a cure," she cautioned, "but it is something that could potentially improve
his quality of life and slow the progression of the illness.
It's a long shot, and it's not covered by any insurance. It's extremely expensive." She paused, expecting to see the familiar look of despair and hopelessness she saw in so many families' faces when confronted with the harsh reality of medical costs. But before Eleanor could even respond, Sarah spoke up, her voice filled with a newfound confidence that surprised even her mother. "That won't be a problem," she said, her voice clear and steady. "The cost will be covered." The doctor raised an eyebrow and Sarah simply said, "We have a benefactor." Michael had arranged everything in the background. He was not there in person, not wanting to create a scene or make the family feel uncomfortable, but his presence was felt in every detail, from the specialized equipment the nurses brought to the world-class caliber of the medical team. He was the unseen force making the impossible possible. By the afternoon, a new plan was in place. Coach Washington would be moved to a private room at the best hospital in the city to begin the new treatment immediately. Michael had already taken care of all the arrangements, including securing a room on a quiet floor reserved for high-profile patients, a place where the family would have privacy and comfort. Later that day, a comfortable state-of-the-art medical transport vehicle arrived at the apartment building. The paramedics who came to move the coach were gentle and respectful, treating him with the dignity he deserved as they wheeled him out of the small, cramped apartment on a stretcher. Eleanor broke down completely, the stress and fear of the past few years finally giving way to a wave of overwhelming gratitude and hope. She leaned on Sarah, watching the ambulance pull away, a vehicle that represented not an end, but a new beginning. "Mom," Sarah said, her own voice shaking with emotion, "I think our lives are about to change." While the medical team was taking care of the coach, Michael Jordan was orchestrating the next phase of his master plan. He had assembled his personal, financial and legal teams in his hotel suite for an emergency meeting. He laid out his vision with absolute clarity. "I want to set up an irrevocable trust for the Washington family." He told them it needs to be enough to cover all their living expenses for the rest of their lives. "I want Eleanor to be able to quit her jobs immediately. I want Sarah to be able to go back to college and finish her degree without worrying about a single bill. I want them to have the financial security to focus completely on the coach's recovery." His lawyers and accountants who managed his vast fortune scrambled to make it happen. They drew up complex legal documents and financial models, working at a speed reserved for their most important client. They knew that when Michael Jordan gave an order, it was to be executed flawlessly and immediately. But Michael's plan went far beyond just financial security. He was also thinking about the family's home. The small, cramped apartment was not a suitable environment for a man with the coach's medical needs, nor was it a place where a family could heal and find peace. He dispatched another team, this one made up of architects and contractors, to discreetly evaluate the building. They reported back that afternoon. The building was old, not well maintained, and lacked an elevator, making significant renovations difficult and expensive. "That's not good enough," Michael said. "Find me something better." He wanted a real home for them, a place where the coach could be comfortable and where his family could live without the constant stress of their surroundings. His real estate team began a frantic search for a suitable property, something on the ground floor or with an elevator, something that could be made fully wheelchair accessible, something in a quiet, safe neighborhood. By evening, they had found a promising option, a beautiful single-story house in a quiet suburb just outside the city. It had a small yard, a spacious layout, and the potential to be transformed into a perfect home for the Washington family. "Buy it," Michael said, without even seeing it in person. "Pay whatever they're asking and get the sale closed as fast as humanly possible. I want your renovation crew ready to start work the moment we have the keys." The sun was setting as Michael finally took a moment to pause. He looked at the detailed plans spread across his table, the medical schedules, the financial projections, the architectural blueprints. It was a massive undertaking, an operation of incredible complexity and cost, but he felt a deep sense of peace. He thought of Eleanor's tear-streaked face and the glimmer of hope in Sarah's eyes. He thought of Coach Washington himself, now in a quiet hospital room, receiving the best care in the world. He knew this was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. He picked up his phone and called Sarah for an update. She told him her father was settled in the hospital and that the doctors were optimistic about the new treatment. She described her mother's relief and gratitude, her voice breaking with emotion as she tried to express how much this all meant to them. "Your father taught me that a team is only as strong as its weakest player." Michael told her for a long time, "Your family has been carrying this burden alone. Now you have a team. You're not alone anymore." After the call, he sat for a long time watching the city lights come on one by one. He had set in motion a powerful machine of charity and compassion. But the most difficult part was yet to come. Coach Washington's fight was just beginning, and Michael Jordan knew he had to be there for every step of the journey, just as the coach had once been there for him on a dusty high school court so many years ago. The next week was a whirlwind of activity, a perfectly executed plan set in motion by Michael Jordan's unwavering determination. While Coach Washington began his new experimental treatment at the hospital, a secret operation was unfolding at the new house the athlete had purchased. His legal team had worked miracles, completing the sale of the house in record time, using every possible means to speed up the process. The moment the keys were in hand, a small army of contractors descended on the property. They worked in shifts around the clock, their trucks and vans lining the quiet suburban street. A testament to the urgency of their mission, Michael had personally overseen the design plans, with the architects spending hours on video calls and reviewing blueprints. He insisted on every detail that would make the coach's life easier and more comfortable. He wasn't just building a house, he was crafting a sanctuary-wide doorways were installed throughout the house, allowing for easy wheelchair access. The master bathroom was completely gutted and rebuilt as a state-of-the-art wet room with a roll-in shower, a heated floor and safety grab bars. A system of discrete ceiling lifts was installed in the master bedroom, a feature that would allow Eleanor to move her husband safely from his bed to his wheelchair without risking injury to herself. The kitchen was completely redesigned with beautiful new cabinets and countertops at different heights, so Eleanor could cook comfortably and Sarah could help without difficulty. Every electrical outlet was moved higher up on the walls, so they could be reached from a seated position, and light switches were replaced with large, easy-to-press panels. Michael Jordan visited the site every day, often late at night after spending hours visiting Coach Washington at the hospital. He would walk through the construction zone wearing a hard hat and reviewing the progress with the foreman. He made changes on the fly, adding a small detail here or upgrading a material there. He wanted the house to be more than just functional. He wanted it to be beautiful and peaceful, a place that felt like a home, not a medical facility. He insisted on large windows that would let in plenty of natural light, and he had a beautiful sunroom added to the back of the house, a glass-enclosed space that would allow the coach to enjoy the feeling of being outdoors, even on days when he couldn't leave the house. He even hired a landscape architect to design a serene garden with raised flower beds and a smooth paved path, so the coach could be wheeled outside to enjoy the fresh air and the scent of flowers while the house was being transformed. Sarah and her mother were living in a comfortable two-bedroom suite at a long-stay hotel, also arranged by Michael. It was a quiet, clean space that felt like a world away from their cramped old apartment. For the first time in years, they were able to sleep through the night without the constant worry of medical emergencies or mounting bills. They spent their days at the hospital with the coach, who was beginning to show small but significant signs of improvement. The new treatment seemed to be working. The cloudy look in his eyes was starting to clear, and he was occasionally able to speak a few words. His doctors were cautiously optimistic. They warned that there was still a long road ahead. But for the first time in a very long time, there was real hope. Sarah kept Michael updated with daily phone calls. She was his eyes and ears on the ground, her voice filled with a growing excitement. With each report, she told him about the first time her father had recognized her and said her name, a moment that made both her and her mother weep with joy. She told him about the moment he had squeezed her mother's hand and smiled, a small gesture that felt like a monumental victory. She relayed every small milestone, every glimmer of progress, and with each piece of good news, Michael's determination grew even stronger. One evening, while visiting Coach Washington at the hospital, he brought along a special guest. It was his own former teammate from the Chicago Bulls, a man who had also played for the coach in high school and had gone on to have a successful professional career. The two famous athletes walked into the hospital room together, their tall frames filling the doorway. The old teammate was shocked to see the coach looking so frail, but he hid his surprise behind a warm smile. "Coach," he said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "Look at you living the high life in this fancy place. Got your own private room and everything." The coach's eyes lit up with recognition. He couldn't say much, but a wide grin spread across his face. The two teammates sat on either side of his bed for over an hour, sharing old stories from their high school days. They talked about big games, tough practices, and the funny things the coach used to say to motivate them. They laughed and reminisced. And for that 1 hour, the sterile hospital room was filled with the warmth and camaraderie of an old locker room. As they were leaving, the teammate pulled Michael aside in the hallway. "I had no idea it was this bad," he said, his voice low. "Thank you for what you're doing for him, Mike. This is incredible." Michael simply nodded. He wasn't doing it for thanks or for recognition. He was doing it because it was the right thing to do for the man who had shaped his life. But the teammate's visit gave him another idea. Coach Washington had influenced hundreds of young men over his long career. What if they could all be a part of this? That night, he started making more calls. He tasked his office with tracking down contact information for dozens of former players from the coach's teams, men who were now doctors, lawyers, businessmen, and fathers, all across the country. He personally called many of them himself, telling them the coach's story and explaining the plan he was putting in place. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Everyone wanted to help. Donations began pouring into the trust fund he had set up. But more than that, people wanted to offer their time and their skills. One former player, who now owned a large construction company in Chicago, offered to send his crew to help with the house renovation for free. Another, who was a financial planner, volunteered to help Eleanor manage the trust fund, ensuring her family's long-term security. A third, who was a renowned chef, organized a meal delivery service for the family, so they wouldn't have to worry about cooking. The project was growing bigger than just one famous athlete's act of gratitude. It was becoming a testament to the coach's legacy, a wave of love and support from all the lives he had touched. It was a beautiful and powerful thing to witness, and it was all happening because a young waitress had found the courage to slip a note into the hand of a famous stranger in a restaurant. Her one small act of desperation had unleashed an avalanche of kindness that would change her family's life forever. The transformation of the house was completed in just under 2 weeks, a timeline that most contractors would have considered absolutely impossible. It was a miracle of planning, hard work, and the shared sense of purpose that had inspired everyone involved. The final result was breathtaking. The house was not just accessible, it was beautiful, warm, and inviting. The walls were painted in soft, calming colors that Eleanor had once mentioned. She liked the floors were a mix of warm hardwood and soft non-slip tile. The furniture was stylish and comfortable, chosen by a professional interior designer who had heard the story and volunteered her services free of charge. The backyard had been transformed into a peaceful oasis, with a small bubbling fountain and a comfortable seating area surrounded by fragrant flowers and mature trees. On the day Coach Washington was scheduled to be released from the hospital, a small group of people gathered at the new house. It was Michael Jordan, his business manager Sarah, and her mother Eleanor, and a few of the key people who had made the renovation happen. They stood in the spacious, sun-filled living room, waiting nervously for the coach to arrive. Michael had arranged for a special medical transport to bring him from the hospital. The driver had been given careful instructions to tell the coach that he was being taken to a new long-term care facility. It was a small lie, but it was necessary to preserve the incredible surprise that awaited him as the transport vehicle pulled into the driveway. Michael felt his heart pounding. He had controlled every aspect of this project with the meticulous detail of a game-winning play. But this was the one thing he couldn't control: the coach's reaction. He watched from the window as the paramedics carefully helped the coach into a brand new motorized wheelchair, a top-of-the-line model that Michael had personally selected. Coach Washington looked much better than he had just a few weeks ago. His color was better, his eyes were clearer, and he was sitting up straighter, thanks to the daily physical therapy he'd received. He looked around the quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood with a confused expression on his face. "This doesn't look like a nursing home," he said. His voice was still weak, but it was clearer than it had been in years. Sarah rushed out the front door to his side and took his hand. "It's not Dad," she said, smiling through her tears. Welcome home. She wheeled him up the smooth new ramp and through the wide front door. Coach Washington stopped just inside the doorway, his mouth falling open in stunned silence. He looked around the beautiful open living room, the gleaming hardwood floors, the sunlight streaming through the large windows. "This isn't our apartment," he whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief and confusion. "No, it's not," Eleanor said, coming to stand beside him, her voice choked with emotion. "This is our new home." The coach looked from his wife to his daughter, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the new furniture, the family photos on the mantel, and the beautiful view of the garden through the sunroom windows. How he asked, his voice trembling, "How is this possible?" At that moment, Michael Jordan stepped out from the adjoining room where he had been waiting patiently. "Coach," he said softly, "welcome home." The coach's eyes locked onto Michael, a man he had mentored as a boy now standing before him as a global icon. A wave of powerful emotions washed over the coach's face: confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally, a dawning understanding. Tears began to stream down his weathered cheeks. He tried to speak, but no words would come out. He simply lifted a trembling hand and pointed at Michael. "You," he managed to say in a choked whisper. "You did this." Michael walked over and knelt in front of his old coach's wheelchair, just as he had done in that bleak apartment. That first night, he took the coach's hand in his. "You taught me how to win games, Coach," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "But you also taught me what's really important in life. You taught me about loyalty, about gratitude, and about taking care of your team. This isn't a gift. This is just me paying back a small part of what I owe you." The room was filled with the sound of quiet sobbing. Eleanor, Sarah, the small team that had gathered, they were all overcome with the emotion of the moment. Coach Washington continued to stare at Michael, his mind slowly piecing together the incredible truth he had been given. A second chance, not just at life, but at a life free from worry and struggle, a life filled with comfort and dignity, and it had all been orchestrated by the boy he had once pushed to be great. Michael then took the coach on a tour of the new house. He showed him the spacious master bedroom with the fully adjustable bed and the discreet ceiling lift. He showed him the incredible accessible bathroom that would allow him to shower with dignity for the first time in years. He showed him the sunroom where he could sit and read, and the beautiful garden outside with its paved path and raised flower beds. He showed him a special room that had been set up as a home gym with physical therapy equipment to help him continue his recovery and build his strength. But the final surprise was in the room that had been designed as a study. On the wall was a large framed picture of the coach's championship-winning high school team from all those years ago. A young Michael Jordan grinning in the front row, and underneath it on a custom-built shelf was a collection of scrapbooks, the same scrapbooks the coach had so carefully put together over the years, filled with articles about his star player's incredible career. "My whole life's work." The coach whispered, his fingers tracing the edge of one of the books which had been carefully preserved and restored. "Your legacy." Michael corrected him gently. "A legacy of changing lives." The coach finally found his voice, his gaze locking with Michael's. "Why?" he asked, looking at him with tears in his eyes. "I was just a high school coach. I was just doing my job." "You were never just a coach," Michael replied. "You were a mentor, a father figure, and a friend. You saw something in a skinny kid who lacked confidence, and you helped him believe in himself. Everything I have, everything I've become, it all started in your gym, on your court. I could never have done it without you." That afternoon, a small celebration was held at the house. Dozens of Coach Washington's former players, the ones Michael had contacted, came to welcome him home. They filled the house with laughter and stories, sharing memories of the man who had shaped their young lives. They presented him with a plaque that read, "To the coach who taught us how to be champions on and off the court." The coach sat in his new wheelchair in the center of his new living room, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. He was overwhelmed with gratitude and love. He had spent his career giving everything he had to his players, never asking for anything in return, and now in his time of greatest need, they had all come together to give back to him. It was a powerful and beautiful testament to the impact one good man can have on the world. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Michael Jordan and Coach Washington found themselves alone for a few minutes in the quiet sunroom. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm golden glow on the room. They sat in comfortable silence while watching the birds in the newly planted garden, a peaceful scene that was a world away from the coach's former life. "Thank you," the coach said finally, his voice soft but clear and stronger than it had been in a long time. The athlete simply nodded. "No thanks necessary, coach. It was my honor to do it." The coach looked at Michael, his gaze steady and clear. "You know, I always knew you were going to be special," he said. "I saw it in you from the first day you walked into my gym. You had a fire in you, a hunger to be the best, and I just tried to give you the tools and the discipline to channel it. You did more than that," Coach Michael replied. "You gave me a chance when others might not have. You believed in me, and that made all the difference." They sat in silence again, comfortable in the shared understanding that had always existed between them, a bond forged in sweat and hard work on a basketball court. Decades ago, after a few moments, the coach spoke again, his voice thoughtful and reflective. "There's something else you've done here," he said, "something bigger than just helping an old man. You've shown all those boys, all those men who came here today, what really matters. You've reminded them that success isn't just about how much money you make or how many trophies you win. It's about what you do for others. It's about remembering where you came from and who helped you get there." Michael looked out at the garden, a small smile on his face. "Maybe," he said softly, "maybe we all reminded each other of that." Today, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard. A new chapter was beginning for Coach Washington and his family, a chapter filled with hope, comfort, and the love of a community that had not forgotten him. And for the famous athlete Michael Jordan, this act of kindness had brought him a sense of peace and fulfillment that no championship ever could. He had used his power not just for himself, but to lift up the man who had first taught him how to soar. In doing so, he had completed a circle of gratitude that had begun decades ago on a simple high school basketball court. It was a victory more profound and more lasting than any he had ever achieved in a packed stadium under the bright lights. The days that followed, the grand reveal settled into a new and peaceful rhythm for Coach Washington and his family. The constant crushing worry about money and medical bills, which had been their unwelcome companion for years, was gone. It was replaced by a sense of peace and security they had never imagined possible. Eleanor Washington was able to quit her 2 exhausting jobs. She had been working for so long, she had almost forgotten what it felt like to have a moment to herself. Now she could dedicate her time to her husband and to rediscovering her own hobbies. She started spending her mornings in the beautiful new garden, finding a deep and quiet solace in the simple act of tending to the flowers. She told Sarah it was the first time in years she felt like she could truly breathe. Sarah, true to Michael's promise, enrolled in the local university to finish her degree in social work. Her family's ordeal had ignited a fire in her, a passion to dedicate her life to helping other families who were facing similar struggles. The trust fund set up by Michael Jordan ensured that she could pursue her dreams without any financial burden, a gift of freedom that was almost as valuable as the house itself. Coach Washington himself continued to make slow but steady progress with the help of daily physical therapy sessions in his new home gym. He began to regain some of his lost strength and mobility. His mind grew clearer and his speech improved. He was able to hold longer conversations, and his old sense of humor began to peek through the fog of his illness. He spent his afternoons in the sunroom, reading books and listening to his favorite jazz music, surrounded by the familiar comfort of his scrapbooks and photos. He was still a sick man, but he was no longer a man without hope. He was a man surrounded by love, supported by the best care imaginable, and living with a dignity that had been restored to him. Michael Jordan remained a constant presence in their lives. He didn't just write a check and disappear as many wealthy benefactors might have done. He called every few days to check in, asking for updates on the coach's health and the family's well-being. He stopped by for quiet visits, sharing a meal, or watching a basketball game on television with the coach. Their relationship had come full circle. The boy who had looked up to the coach for guidance was now the man providing strength and support. They would sit for hours on the back patio, talking not just about old times and famous victories, but about the future, about the lessons they had learned, and the legacy they hoped to leave behind. It was a friendship that had been rekindled and deepened by this shared journey. One afternoon, about a month after the coach had moved into his new home, Michael arrived with a proposal. He sat down with the coach in the sunroom, his expression serious but his eyes shining with an idea. "Coach," he said, "I've been thinking your story, the way all your former players came together to help you. It has inspired so many people. What if we could find a way to help other coaches like you, other mentors who give their lives to young people but end up struggling in their later years with health problems or financial hardship? I want to start a foundation," he continued, "a foundation that will provide financial assistance and medical support to retired high school coaches and teachers who have fallen on hard times. And I want to name it after you, the Coach Dean Washington Legacy Fund." The coach was stunned into silence. A foundation in his name. The idea was almost too much to comprehend. "I'm just a coach," he said humbly, his voice raspy with emotion. "What do I know about running a foundation?" "You know everything that matters," Michael replied. "You know the struggles these people face. You know the sacrifices they make. You won't be running it alone. Of course, I'll fund it, and my team will handle the operations, but you will be its heart and its soul. You will be the inspiration. Your story will be the light that guides it." And so the Coach Dean Washington Legacy Fund was born, with the coach as its honorary chairman and Michael Jordan as its primary benefactor. It started with a mission to help a few dozen retired educators in their home state. But with Michael's fame and influence behind it, the foundation quickly grew into a national organization, provided grants to cover medical bills, assisted with housing costs, and created a network of support for the unsung heroes of the educational system, the people who dedicate their lives to shaping the next generation, often for little pay and even less recognition. Coach Washington took his new role seriously. He couldn't travel or give speeches, but from the comfort of his home, he would review applications and talk on the phone with potential recipients. He would listen to their stories and offer words of encouragement, his voice once again filled with the strength and wisdom that had inspired so many young players. His own life had been saved by an act of extraordinary kindness, and now he was spending his remaining years paying that kindness forward, creating a new legacy that would extend far beyond the basketball court. Years passed. Coach Washington lived several more years in comfort and dignity, surrounded by his loving family. His illness never went away completely, but it was managed with the best possible care, allowing him to enjoy a quality of life he and his family had never thought possible. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, his funeral was attended by hundreds of people, former players, colleagues, students, and the many educators from across the country who had been helped by his foundation. They came not to mourn but to celebrate a life of service and profound impact. Michael Jordan gave the eulogy, his voice steady but filled with deep emotion. He didn't talk about championships or trophies or his own legendary career. He talked about a man who taught a skinny kid from North Carolina how to believe in himself. He talked about a man whose quiet legacy was not measured in wins and losses, but in the countless lives he had made better through his dedication and his kindness. After the funeral, Sarah, who was now a successful social worker running a non-profit organization of her own, approached Michael. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her smile was bright. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for everything you did for my dad and for us. You gave him back his life in those final years. You gave us all a future." Michael smiled, a sad but gentle smile. "Your father gave me my future first," he said. "I was just returning the favor." He continued to fund and support the Coach Dean Washington Legacy Fund for the rest of his life, ensuring that the coach's spirit of generosity and mentorship would continue to help others for generations to come. The story of the coach and the athlete became a quiet legend, a tale whispered in locker rooms and teachers' lounges across the country. A reminder that the greatest victories are often the ones that happen off the court. It all started with a simple act of courage, a young waitress slipping a desperate note into a famous man's hand. but it grew into a powerful story about gratitude, loyalty, and the enduring impact one good person can have on the world. It showed that true greatness is not about what you achieve for yourself, but about what you do for others, especially for those who first helped you find your own way. If this story of paying it forward and honoring the past has moved you, please let us know by liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more inspiring content. We love hearing from our viewers, so take a moment to leave a comment below telling us which part of this incredible journey touched you the most. And don't go anywhere just yet. There is another video appearing on your screen right now that we know you will love. It's a story that will warm your heart and remind you of the power of human kindness. Click on it now and continue the inspiration.